Morning. So I wanted to talk about slave of a king. Because it says a slave of a king is a king, or servant of a king. But we're going to talk about what it means to be an Eved Ivri. Good morning, Stephen Wagman. Good morning. So I found a very interesting topic. Yeah, I got a lot of sources, a lot of English sources. We'll probably skim through those. And then I want to share with you a Shem Shmuel again. Oh, also a Shla. Some interesting topics on this. Why is being a slave of a king like being a king? Or it is being a king, that is kingship. So the pasuk that we learned yesterday, good morning. The pasuk that we learned yesterday is what brought me to this whole conversation. Okay, to this whole idea, to explore it. It says, start out and make your way to the hill country of the Amorites and to all their neighbors in the Araba, the hill country, the Shefal, the Negev, the seacoast, the land of Canaan and Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river of Euphrates. So God's giving us our journey, right? Okay, thanks, good morning to you. And he refers to the river Euphrates as Nahar Gadol Nahar Pras. It's a great river. What makes it great? So Rashi looks into that. Nahar Gadol, what Rashi says, because it's mentioned with respect to the holy land of Eretz Yisrael, it's called great. Mishal Hedyet Imar, like a common popular proverb would be, Eved Melech Melech. If you're a slave of the king, you're their king. He says, a king's servant is a king. Attach yourself to a captain and people will bow down to you. Go near to an anointed, a distinguished person, and you become anointed. Distinguished yourself. You become a king. Okay? That's what Rashi's explaining this to me. He uses a common proverb. Tell us that when you're around great people, you'll be great. So if this river is associated with the Holy Land, which is something great, it too is great. So now we have a Gemara in Shavuos that says, it refers to this verse into the great river now, Pras, Shimon ben Tarfon Emer, Karav Lagabe Dehina V'idhan. Oh, this is the part that I couldn't translate. Now I have a translation for it. Shimon ben Tarfon says, although it is not the largest river, Euphrates is called great. In fact, it was listed fourth of the four great rivers that come up from Eretz Yisrael. Good morning, Mordechai. And since it's listed fourth, commentaries say that means it's the smallest of all of them. But why is it called great then? So Shimon ben Tarfon says, draw close to the one anointed with oil and become anointed as well. That's the Hina, the Idhan. The one is anointed with oil, be anointed. Because the Euphrates is close to Eretz Yisrael, it's called great. School of Rabbi Yishmael taught a similar idea. The servant of a king is like a king. So that paraphrases that idea. That by being close to people who are anointed, you too are anointed. Okay, now I have an Orach Chaim on this. Tam ha'inish hu lebeis sibas. Why was Miriam and Aaron punished? They spoke about Moshe, right? Moses could not be treated merely as a chacham, a sage. This is the first reason. Okay, why were Miriam and Aaron punished with talking about Moshe? Moshe could have just said, you know what? I'm good. I don't have a problem with you, Miriam and Aaron. I know you love me. Don't worry about it. He could have said that. Why didn't he? So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh answers this question. So he says, the reason why Miriam and Aaron were punished were, for one, the first reason, Moses cannot be merely treated as a sage because he had the status of a king. Based on a pasuk, V'hiru Shur Melech, Moshe Rabbeinu is called a king, Moses. A king is not allowed to waive, W-A-I-V-E, the honor due to him. You can't just say, don't worry about it, I'll go last in the line for hot dogs. You can't say that if you're a king. You have to be the head of the pack. Therefore, Moses could not have forgiven the insult. He wasn't allowed to because he was a king. That's just the law. Even if he had felt like doing so. Moreover, I think this is the second reason. Moreover, this may even have been what God alluded to when he described Moses as his servant in the verse, which says in Gemara Shavuos that we just quoted, the king's servant is to be accorded a status similar to that of the king himself. Seeing that Moses was a servant of the king, of kings, he too was to be accorded royal status. So 2 reasons. 1, if you're a king, you can't defer. 1, if you're a slave, what are you a slave of? If you're a servant, who are you going to serve? If Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was serving the King of Kings, he too was royalty. So we have 2 reasons why he couldn't pardon the disrespect afforded him. Okay, here's another concept. I think we're going to get into the concept of an Eved Ivri soon. This is a Mechilta of Rabbi Yishmael. He says, quoting the verse, who took you out from the land of Egypt, they were servants of kings. Okay, the Jewish people were servants of kings when we went out. You say they were servants of kings, but perhaps they were servants of servants? Ask, how do you know? In other words, what's the proof? And he redeemed you from the house of servants, from the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Makes it clear, that verse, that they were servants of kings and not servants of servants. Okay, that teaches us that we weren't servants to the Egyptians, but the servants of the king himself, subject to the king. So God takes us out not to be the flip side of a slave necessarily from this perspective, rather the subject of a king. Now you're going to be my subjects. Other places it makes it very clear it's talking about the type of relationship like it's called slavery. There's people right paying ball in my front lawn. It's pretty cool. I don't know who they are. Variantly, so another answer, from the house of servants, what does this mean? They came out from the house of servants. What made them servants or slaves? From the house of the servants of idolatry. They were in a pagan land, okay? I have another verse here from Bereshis that calls it in our process. It's the first time we were introduced to this river. It's called Great, and Rashi says it's called Great because of its connection to the Holy Land, okay? And it brings the verse, the king of servants is a king, attach yourself to a captain, and people will bow down to you. Okay, that's from Medrash Rabbah, Bereshis Rabbah. Now we have a shlah. It says, this is the hint when it says Eved Melech Melech. The slave of a king is a king. But vad pshat inid haremes hu Eved Melech hu Melech ba'atzmai. Notwithstanding the literal meaning, the hint here is that a slave of a king is the king himself. The sham who had dvekas shalai, hakol lamainai, and he cleaves. The servant cleaves to the king, and everything is for the king's sake. Hakol lamanai, harei yesh shnei minei avdus. There's 2 types of slavery or servitude. Al derech. Yelid bias miknas kesef, yelid bias yeser davak ba'adainim and miknas kesef. We're talking about 2 types of slaves here. One that's born into the house, and one who is bought. Okay? When we're talking about the slave of a king is a king, he really is a king. Why? How could he be a king if he's a slave? A king is not allowed to be a slave by halacha. It's brought up in stories in Tanakh even, I think, or in this interesting story. Who bechinas yelid bias? That is when you're born into the house. V'ken ksiva etzal Moshe Rabbeinu. So it says about Moshe Rabbeinu b'chol beisi naman. And in connection with that, we say that Moses was welcome in all places of God's house. And then it goes on, Madu lo yiresa l'daber ba'avdi. Why were you not fearful to speak of my slave, of my servant? Because he's welcome in all my house. He was yelid bias. He was born in my house. He wasn't someone I acquired by purchase. Ki Eved Melech Melech. Okay, a slave of a king is a king. Ve'inyan gamken shedabak b'sharash sharishin nishmasi. When you, the spiritual idea behind here is when you cleave to the source of your soul, b'chinas has dakbus, his dakbakis el havoyo hakadmainis. When you cleave to this primordial creator, etzim shem havoya shahaya hu ushmei v'nikra az yedaid melech kediprashti. You become the beloved of the king. Okay, when your soul cleaves to its source, you're the beloved of the king. I think that's beautiful, but it gives you this idea of what it means. that a slave of a king is a king, meaning when you recognize what your whole purpose of life is, the whole reality of existence is, which is God, the King of Kings, and that your source is that. So that's who you are at the truest level of your identity. Like, who do you identify as, right? That idea that public conversation applies here. It's a spiritual question to us. What do we identify as? The Rasha or the tzaddik within us? I'm telling you that now is the time to identify as a tzaddik. That's the message of all these shtusim v'havolim, all this mishugasim, all this craziness, is to teach us this idea. We have to question our identity and know nefesh shenis Yisrael. What do we say? That the second soul of the Jewish people, that's the godly soul, it's true identity. Why does it come second? Why does evening come before morning? The whole creation of the world is this game that God created for us to discover Him. Okay, now I'm going to teach you part of Hashem Mishmol. It's very long. I don't have the time in front of me. So, well, I could get that quickly if you guys are less quick to the draw. It is 8:59. Okay, we got some time. So I want to touch on this, and then I want to tell you how I was able to understand this, because it's pretty hard, okay? But I looked up the source of the mitzvah of Eved Ivri in the Tzemach Tzedek's writings. He talks about a Hebrew slave. What does that mean? What does that represent to us? A Jew as a slave? Here we said a slave of a king is a king. But here it's talking about being the slave itself. Remember yesterday we learned about the Elter Chassid, the old man that told the younger man who was going wild about Meshalim and Chassidus. It's awesome. It's talking about a king and his palace, his glory, whatever he's talking. Like sometimes he's focusing on the allegory. So the Elder Chassid tells him, you're so impassioned about the mashal. And remember, we spoke about the importance of passion. That's the fire that's going to bring the tzaddikim to do tshuva and bring Mashiach. But if you're so enthusiastic, why are you focusing on the allegory? It's meant to teach you something, so focus on that something. He says that's a better approach. There are two approaches, okay? There's two types of isbainus, of meditation. Both of them are important. Good morning, Rabbi Korf. So both of them are important. But sometimes we emphasize one and sometimes the other, depending on what goal and who you are and where you're holding. What part of your service are you supposed to be focusing on right now? You have to know yourself very well to make that determination in a genuine way. Okay, so I want to share the Shem Shmuel because I'm really getting into his teachings. He talks about Mashiach law and Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, and I never hopped on to Mashiach ben Yosef. I always thought it was like some kind of mythology only. I never appreciated its spiritual significance. That we're in a time now. Mashiach ben Yosef, his job is to plow our hearts, to make us tzaddikim. Okay? Why doesn't it say about Mashiach ben David that? Asava Rishol Letzid Kusa. Or it says, Asava Tziddikaya B'siyukta. Oh. So we say, instead of Tziddikaya, it said Rishaya. The Rishoyim. Mashiach's going to bring Rishoyim to do tshuva. Why does it say the tzaddikim? Because that's the job of Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef is going to make tzaddikim. He's going to take people out of their rishas, the things that drive their, the trauma that we sort of ingest and just live with and roll around in our head all day long. That trauma, that type of negativity, right? That dwelling on negativity, that's what Mashiach ben Yosef is going to uproot, okay? And nobody's really blazing a path on how to do that in the rabbinical context, so I think that that's very important. So let's support that idea if you're behind me, if you're with me. There's three aspects of a person. There's the body, soul, and intellect, okay? In terms of Chassidus Chabad, we would talk about Nefesh Bahamas, Nefesh Sichlis, and Nefesh Elokis. The animal soul, the intellectual soul, and the godly soul. Here we say body, soul, and intellect. And he talks about three schusim that pertain to these three aspects. It happens to be the mitzvah of sending away your Hebrew slave after he passed 6 years. In the 7th year, you set him free. And I had to look into what that means because I had to make this resonate in terms I relate to more, which is Chassidus Chabad. So I found this mimer in Tzemach Tzedek that really brought this to light. And I want to share that with you because I think you're going to really like that. So that's one of the three is the mitzvah of setting free your Eved Ivri. What that means, awesome stuff. Then it's Melech Mashiach. It says chus. These are things that bring you to, I guess, these shleimus of guf, nefesh, and seichel, body, soul, and intellect. How do you come to perfection in that? These three things. The mitzvah of casting away the Hebrew slave. Melech Mashiach himself. And what's the third thing? Elio and Navi, right? His forerunner, his herald. The person was designed to live in paradise and have everything, grapes, ready to pluck and eat, or have someone else do that for you. Or some animal doing that for you. I don't know. Shamash Gadol, Nachash HaKadmaini. Even the serpents, is intended for a reason. Ultimately, they become a Shamash Gadol, a great servant. We're talking about servitude. It's a different word there, but it's the same idea, at least. So, a person was created that he should have all of his needs taken care of. That's God created someone to bestow goodness on him, it says, I think, in the Zohar. God created the world to give. And there was a punishment brought about from the sin of the first man who ate from the tree of knowledge, right? But punishment, it explains here, is not for the sake of vengeance, rather, or to exact punishment. Punishment is not an end unto itself, but rather it's to correct the person. So the person had it good and became corrupted. So the punishment is, now he's got to work for it. It's not just given to him. That's why it says, the punishment was stated as, his body now had to be preoccupied with making a living, as it says, "B'zeyas apcha teichel lechem," or "Zeyas apecha teichel lechem." With the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. So that it became the flip side of taking for granted paradise was now you're going to have to work, and it's going to be more difficult for you to have a spiritual paradise also now, because you're spending your whole time preoccupied in very mundane things. And I told you how people are trapped in that rat race. This is going to speak about that at length, I think. And then we're going to bring in Mashiach, and we're going to explain what an Eved Ivri is and how that's Mashiach. Sending away the Eved Ivri, the Hebrew slave, that is Mashiach in the most complete way. And here we're going to have a hint of it too in this context. Okay? I might skip a little bit. Shilach Eved Ivri. Okay, we said that. Okay, good. Okay, it goes on. Okay, we said that. Before they sinned, good morning. Before the Adam, the first man who had completion, he was complete and whole, his body was so healthy, it only wanted to serve God. He was a pure conduit. His very body, his flesh, was a conduit to want to serve God. Just like I want to eat pizza, he wanted to serve God. Okay, you got to think about what your pizza is in your world and decide to understand this idea. Okay, what it means. I have to tell you a quick story. The fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Shab, was at a conference of rabbis talking about, the education of the Jewish people or something in those parts. And there were other Rabbanim there, okay? And he represented Chabad, obviously, in the Jewry of his geographical location, which was probably White Russia, or I don't know. I'm not so good at geography. It wasn't White Russia. It was Rostov, maybe? I don't know. So he was in charge of that. Anyway, so he represented, there was a banquet, they were going to eat. And so he had to wash water to have a meal. He has to wash his hands for bread, rather. So when he did it 3 times according to the Minhag Chabad, which is based on a source. But someone challenged him and said, well, we don't wash our hands 3 times. Where's your source? He says, you know what, at the moment, I can't really remember the source for this law. But the very fact that I do it proves that it's in Shulchan Aruch. And I think the Frierdiker Rebbe told the story of the Rebbe, that the meaning of this is when he was turning 13, his father, the Rebbe Marash, told him that he had to learn the entire Shulchan Aruch before his bar mitzvah. So the Rebbe Rishab learned Torah in such a way that he internalized it all, and his body immediately attuned towards what was required of it. And therefore, his body would immediately does what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay? I've said that story before, but it's worthy of repetition. So his body was driven to serve God. Another time, it says also about the Rebbe Rishab, that someone spoke Lashon Hara in the earshot, became deaf, just like that. Okay? So that's the kind of person we're talking about here. That's Adam Arishan before the sin. And he was living in the world to come. But after the sin, he lost that mindset. So he has a soul now, and he has to now be the one to give sustenance to his soul through feeding it. Feeding your body so that your soul can be nourished. His soul is from a spiritual source. It's called El Yonim, the supernal realms. Now he has to serve that. It was served to him before, so it's Mida Keneged Mida. It's corresponding. Karmic perfection in different language. Unfortunately, we have to use that language. Now again, he returned back to be the slave of a king. He's a king. So once you take care of your soul, it seems, isn't that what it's saying? Once he serves his soul by doing that, by being healthy, it seems, that brings your soul back to find expression and make your body now pure conduit to want to serve God, which is what we're going through now. That's what Mashiach ben Yosef is going to do to this world, and it's happening now. If you're anointed, those, other people are going to be anointed through you. Okay, it goes on about this whole idea. Then it brings the Mashiach. Connects this with Mashiach. I'm going to skip to that. But to be let's just read the end of this last part. Okay, so when we talk about the mitzvah to send away the Hebrew servant, right? The pshitis. The health of his body means that he's not going to need to be his own slave, which means he's enslaved to feeding the soul, right? In other words, you're meant to be miraculously provided for. It's just a natural, that's the way God made the world. It's just a corrective measure to make you now have to serve your soul. But when you have perfect health, that's what we mean when we say sending away the Hebrew servant. This is the complete body of a person. Remember we said there's three things. There's the body, there's the soul, and there's the intellect. Now we're going to say Melek Mashiach is intellect and Eliyahu Navi is soul, okay? And it goes on to explain that. And when we talk about soul, we're talking about character, the midas. So you have intellect and midas. And the midas are supposed to be determined by the soul, by the intellect. Your seichel, your chabad is supposed to determine your midas. It's, right? That's the Ema Banim Smecha, isn't it called? Mother. Shleisha Imahis, Chabad. The three mothers, Chabad. Okay, so I'm going to that will be my touching on that concept. Now I want to go to explain this. Okay, he talks about speeding Mashiach to come up. Let me just read this. Ha'emer Yufan, Shemasha Amar, Atman Maharas Melech Mashiach Levai, Hu Shleimas HaSeichel. The completeness of your intellect, that speeds up Mashiach from coming. Here's a great source for this idea. It's about mindset. Because Mashiach is Chabad, okay? That's Eliyahu, That's Eliyahu Zeh Shleimas HaNefesh. Talking about Eliyahu, that's the completion of the soul, which we said meant the midas, the character. When all these things are completed, it seems to be saying they're completed now. Nishlamu, it's been completed, the perfection of all these three aspects, body, soul, and intellect. Hashem's going to return the fathers unto their children, the children to their fathers. It explains what that means. There'll be a connection between Seichel and Midas, okay? Shleimus and Nefesh, okay. Shekayim, okay. Shal Yidei Shekayim Echon Yisrael Mitzvah Shiluch again. Yavol Eliyahu Melech Mashiach. Says what you do. Okay. It's a lot. Now we got to talk about another mitzvah, which I want to deal with right now because it's a whole background that's required. But now let's see what the Tzemach Tzedek says, what an Eved Ivri is. Because it's a mitzvah to send him away in the 7th year. Or if a a jubilee year appears within the 6 years from when you purchased him, you have to send him away, unless he wants to be kept. And then you pierce his ear, and he's until the jubilee, he stays as your slave. And I don't know if you could go past that. I can't remember right now. So, if he manages to pay off, he can go free, or if the master dies, he goes free. So there's different ways to free a Jewish slave. A non-Jewish slave can be kept forever. Not just, it doesn't go free in the jubilee. Shalach miniach ben zachar, nirtza gamken, nirtza gamken kedinei. Okay, if you leave a ben zachar, I guess, okay, I'm not going to try and talk about that now. Nirtza gamken, so if a person pierces their ear, gamken kedinei hakasiv bay. Okay. Okay, that was the chinuch. That was the Sefer HaChinuch. It enumerates all the mitzvahs, and it speaks there about mitzvah of Eved Ivri. How do you send him away in the 7th year, or these other reasons that we mentioned. Then it speaks about 2 types of souls. Remember we spoke about Yalid bias in the Shem Shmuel, talked about someone who's brought up in the home, that's Moshe Rabbeinu, called Beisi Neman. He grew up in the bias. He's not he's acquisition, like acquired as a slave as an acquisition, so much as he was born there. Maybe that's what it's referring to here. Shehilniach ben Zachar. Okay, I don't know exactly what it's referring to here at the moment. Here it talks about 2 types of souls. So there we said there's 2 types of slaves. Okay, now we're going to talk about 2 types of souls which seem to correspond here. It says, Zarisi as Beis Yisrael Zera Adam Zera Behema. I implanted the Jewish people with 2 types of seed, the seed of man and the seed of animal. And that has to do with what distinguishes a man from an animal. It's das, the ability to perceive that when you're trampling around in a China store, there's something precious that's getting shattered. The bull doesn't appreciate that. He's having a jolly good time, right? There's a sensitivity that's required that's called das, that makes a person unique. That's called, in spiritual terms, that's called Zera Adam, which means someone who perceives the sanctity of Kedusha, of holiness, of mitzvahs. He appreciates that when you do something, it has meaning. A Zera Behema is someone who has to learn that through inspiration. In the future to come, we're going to have Das in every single Jewish person. Okay, we're all going to know Hashem. The world's going to be filled with knowledge of Hashem like water fills the ocean bed. Everyone's going to know me, it says in Yirmiyahu. This is all through the intermediary of Moshe. By him drawing Das into us. And look at the Rebbe's last mimer he left us with so far. That speaks about that he's a shepherd of the Jewish people. He takes faith. And this is basically a similar thing to faith, but faith is in even a higher aspect. This is actually perceiving it. If you don't perceive it and you have faith, that's a very foundational, fundamental power of a person. Here we're talking about actually experiencing it. That's more experiential and therefore more powerful in the sense of it overwhelms you and creates your whole mindset and being, your personality. It's the midas being affected. It's the Mashiach and Eliyahu Navi, the midas and the seichel together, unified. Okay, so that is an Eved Ivri, is someone who serves. We talked about him toiling to bring his body to the shleimus. Okay? So in the 7th millennium, right? At the end of time, it's the time of receiving reward. We worked on our bodies, we worked on ourselves, and we worked on being spiritualizing ourselves throughout Hayam Lasaisam today to do the work, but in the 7th, we're going free. We're no longer serving ourselves in the terms of refining ourselves, but so much as now we're refined and we have to just draw down. We have to use ourselves as a pure conduit now to receive and reach a higher Aveda completely. Okay? That is when our bodies are now in tune with God. That's when our bodies want to serve God again. Let's see what the Tzemach Tzedek says in his words, okay? Because that was more borrowing the lexicon of Shem Shmuel. So he says, "Shekadosh Baruch Hu yesh lo yavadim ivri manal." God has Hebrew slaves. Va'avdim kol sheish. They serve God throughout the 6 millennium. It's saying 6 millennia. all 6,000 years. Hamshis alfe shane, lefat b'chol echad hu bira sheishis midas. And in the microcosm, in the person yourself, right, in you, how does that manifest itself? It's not through 6,000 years. You don't necessarily live that long, right? But you have 6 character traits that have to be refined. Interestingly, it says, those who say, Amin Yeheshme Rabbah, it refines them, it takes away the judgment upon him for 70 years. I learned Chassidus that taught that those 7 years correspond to the 7 midas, as they are expressed as 10 within each 7. So you have 70. So the 70 years represents your 7 attributes. You're drawing down holiness to purify your 7 attributes. That's what brings godliness into the word. Yeheshme Rabbah, God's great name, will be revealed in the world. To all the worlds. You're bringing godliness into all the worlds. That's refining your nefesh bahamas in terms of you. What's your world? That's your character. And when you say Amen Yeheshme Rabbah with all your power, you're refining yourself. Okay, but that's the same idea here. And they're cast free. There's a freedom associated with the 7th. Hu elef hashviv. That's the ultimate state. When we've done the Avodah, and now you cast that service away, and there's a certain freedom associated with the 7th year, 7th millennium. We are commanded to emulate God. Who did kinyan eved ivri? V'neshalchehu chofshi. So that's embodied through the mitzvahs. So when it says that when you acquire a Jewish slave, and you send him free, b'shana hashvis, on the 7th year, lefisha yideze nisayrer ken l'mayla. That accomplishes the same idea above. All that we spoke about in the course of these 7 pages that I skipped, okay, and the tranquility of eternal life, which is Mashiach. That's the wondrous, the nifla, the pella that God's going to shine on us. In the 7th generation, in the 7th millennium rather, when our bodies want to serve God. So there's nothing standing in the way of serving God. Right now, God made a whole drama that we're distant. That distance, you could see that as a journey. And you can make a whole narrative about a journey, right? We have that. The Jewish people coming out of Egypt expresses that beautifully. Our Torah itself is based on that narrative, right? Coming out of servitude. It's our whole model of our identity as a Jew. It's very important to internalize that message and know that by doing that, you're freeing yourself completely. You're in Adam and Rishon before. Therefore, you're out of the rat race. You're no longer the person that has to just serve God to feed himself. Nah. It's all about feeding myself. No. It's about recognizing your relationship with the Baal, that's a Kadosh Baruch Hu, that's the Malka, the king, who's the one that's feeding you miraculously because he doesn't care about you toiling. It's not. You're meant to toil in love with God. That's Yelchu Milchayel Choyel. Tzaddikim are going to go from strength to strength forevermore. There's no menucha to them. But here we're saying that is the menucha l'chayo elamim. That is the tranquility. It's not tranquility if you can't get out of bed because you're too lazy and your muscles are too weak. There's a strength and a freedom in being strong and exercising agency, being a master of your own, determining your own path and walking upright, directed to our land. That's where we're going. Our land. Artseinu, you know what I say? I have mine when we say that? Not just our land, everyone. By virtue of us being one, then it's our land, including God. I include God in that because God wants that land to be with us there more than you could possibly imagine. Okay? You don't need theatrics to know that or to express that. Okay, even if you think that that's what I'm about. 70% Mender Futterfast style. No. He's a genius, okay? A natural. There's an idea of working on yourself, and this idea of now we have a higher Veda. It's a time where Harikaisi lachem bracha ad bli dai. Ad she'yiblu sifseichem milaymar dai. You're going to say enough. Why? You're going to say enough, God. If you're showering blessings on me, like I can't even fathom what you're doing to me. Well, I feel so incredible. Thank you for consoling me to such an extent. So you're going to say, enough, let me give back. I give back everything to you, God. You're giving me everything here. I'm accepting everything only to give it back to you. That's what the yin yang that's going on there. You got to see that, because that's the beauty of it. Okay, guys, have a really good day. Blessings to everyone in every area.